So welcome. We are recording today. This is Navigating the Wild, Wild West of Publishing. And I'll be sharing some slides. We'll be taking some questions and answers. We'll have a few times where we'll be doing some interaction. For those of you that are on the early part of this call, there's a new feature to Zoom. I was on a call the other day that somebody showed me this. Down at the very bottom, you may have noticed there's a little button now called Reactions. Click on that once and you can see that there's different icons that you can choose from. So I'm going to ask a couple questions and you get to answer by using the icons. So the first question I have is, of those who are currently now in attendance, if you could give me a thumbs up if you are currently a published author. So I'm going to give myself a thumbs up. I'm going to say, Nadine, I know you are. And so Elizabeth, you're working on it. And for the people that are here on the phone, we'll try and psychically read your mind here as to what your answer would be. So then, of those of you who have published, which of the icons would you pick that depicts how you felt about your experience in publishing? We got some parties going on. Awesome. Awesome. That's probably, who wouldn't want it to be a party? And we've got one applause. That's awesome. Yeah, terrific. So that's just a fun little game that somebody played on a Zoom call the other day, and I thought, oh, we can interact with that. Hi, Karen. Thanks for joining us. So not that I wouldn't love to stay and enjoy a conversation with you guys, but I am going to share my screen, and we are going to switch over to slides. So I apologize not having this up, but we've got it up now. And we're going to view full screen. Terrific. Let me minimize this. So if at any time you have a question, because I can no longer see the chat box, if you could raise your hand, and I'm going to try and keep everybody in view here. And if I accidentally don't see your hand, I'm not ignoring you. Go ahead and unmute yourself and just jump in and ask the question, because there could be a lot going on and I may not see everybody's hand as they jump up. But I do want this to be interactive. So as we're walking through it and the slides, my goal here is just to give you a big picture idea of what your different options are. I know many of you on this call today, I either know you in person or I know that you're on the self-publishing path. So we're going to jump in here. How many have seen this sign, "Do not drive through smoke"? And you can either give me a thumbs up this way or, yeah. When you're driving through Oklahoma and Texas, you'll see this a lot. And I grew up in Oklahoma. And hold on, I'm trying to get my little buttons to work. There we go. I have this belief, and some of you may have heard me say this, we all have a story to tell and wisdom to share. And when we don't share our wisdom, that wisdom is lost forever. No, my buttons aren't working. Okay, but we can work around it. When I was, this is a 1958 Rambler. So when I was about 4, my grandmother had one of these. She lived out in kind of the country around near a lake. And I can remember driving with her in Oklahoma. This is Northeast Oklahoma. I'm riding in the backseat way before seatbelts, way before, you're heading kind of child restraint or car seats with her kids. And I do remember bouncing around in the back of that car. And all at once I feel her, slam on the brakes, and I kind of go rolling over and catch myself. I had to have been about 4 years old when this happened. And so we're talking early 1960s. I'll just go ahead and tell you, I was born in 56. So somewhere around 1960. And there's this smoke billowing, and she had the wisdom and knew to slam on our brakes and turn around and not drive in that smoke. Well, so what happens in Oklahoma, you get these brush fires. I mean, they can be started by anything, by wind, by a spark, by lightning. And there's a lot of tumbleweeds, and these tumbleweeds roll across the highways, and you get these fires along the highways. And they tell you don't drive. They even teach you this in driver's ed. Don't drive through smoke, because if you get one of those tumbleweeds stuck under your car, the whole thing's going to blow up. So these signs are all over. And when I talk about publishing, there is some areas in the publishing industry that are kind of like driving through smoke. So my goal today is to share some wisdom to kind of help keep us all from going into that, what I call smoke and mirrors arena. If you choose to go beyond self-publishing or even within the, independent publishing arena. A little bit about my history for some of you that may not know me. I grew up in Oklahoma, and not long ago, I've been in this cleaning out closet mode for at least definitely the last 10 months. And I ran across a book that I had made in grade school, and that's in the upper left over there. I'm calling this my first ever book that I produced, but it unfortunately was all handwritten. I don't know where I got these postcards. Somebody in my family must have been on a vacation, and I'd never seen a beach, let alone want to be on it. It's like, okay, this was a dream come true. So for whatever class project, I made this book, and it's my impression of traveling to these islands with, beaches and water and palm trees. And so it's fun to run across that. And how many in here remember those little brass tabs that you used to punch holes and you'd put through your books? And that's how we made books back in the mid to 1960s. So it was quite a treasure for me to find. That's a good word for it. When I got out of school, out of high school, out of college, one of my first jobs was in the printing industry. And down here, this is one of those print, and right now I can't even say wooden print. The word just went right out of my brain, where they roll it through a press and you get a horse impression. And I worked for an old time printing company in Oklahoma, and where, they were setting the type in the back and they had galleys that came out. So I learned about printing at a very early age. Later on, after I moved to St. Louis, and I ended up working, some of you who used to live here or still do may remember a chain of bookstores called Library Limited. They had a huge store in Clayton, and I worked there for 3 to 5 years, something like that. And I was their window person, and I also helped them with their marketing, their annual catalog. And from that, I was pulled into finance. And a lot of people go, well, what does finance have to do with books? But as I look back on it, I ran a department. We had 18 designers, and we produced presentation books for the entire new business for the trust division. So I was still making books, even when I was in finance. And then fast forward to where we are now, starting 2021. And it's amazing to think that we've worked with over 500 authors in the last 15 years and have helped them bring their books and their story to publish. So that part for me has been pretty exciting to work with a lot of you. Let me take a sip here. There's 3 things I want to make sure we cover today. And again, let me remind you, if you do have a question, just unmute yourself and jump in, because I can't see the chat room from this screen. We're going to talk about how to find your voice and create your author brand platform. I know a couple of you, we've had this conversation one-on-one. We're going to talk about how to share your story, books that sell you. And we're going to talk about how to make an impact, publishing paths, whether it's self-publishing, DIY, or whether it's self-publishing, having someone help you, or whether you're approaching an agent to be traditionally published. We're going to tackle a big picture perspective of each of that. When it comes to branding, the one thing that I tell a lot of our authors, no 2 guys are alike. You have on the far left, Guy Fieri. If you're into the cooking channels, I don't know, probably has a half dozen TV shows. Of course, his book down underneath his magazine photo, He has a cookbook. Of course, that makes sense. He's a chef. The Family Guy, and believe it or not, I've never seen this show, but I understand it's big with a younger crowd. And of course, that book happens to be a comic book. And then Bill Nye the Science Guy. Now, there's two versions of Bill Nye the Science Guy. There's my generation that grew up with Bill Nye, which is the Disney version in the background. And Bill Nye has actually rebranded himself in the last couple years and has come out more from a scientific perspective rather than a fun and games perspective. So that's kind of fun watching him rebrand himself. The idea being no two guys are alike, so no two authors are alike. Now, whoops, sorry, I meant to go backwards. There we go. Yay, my buttons worked. So I looked this week just to make sure that there were no new updates yet. I don't know if it's because of the pandemic, but the latest numbers that we have are actually from the end of 2019. There are no 2020 numbers yet. We may just still be a little bit early. But in 2019, you can see the growth with over 45,000 authors just in the US alone. It grew over 28% between 2017 and 2019, it being the number of ISBNs that were purchased. And you need that ISBN. It's like a social security number for your book. The one interesting statistic that had changed in the last year since I looked, ebooks have stayed decreasing by about 13%. And up until yesterday, when I found this new number, audio had gone up 13%. But over the last year, audio was now up 20% because a lot of people stuck at home, a lot of people stuck in their cars. It's a great way to multitask. So a lot of our authors, especially on the nonfiction or the novel side, are going into audiobooks also. But you can tell, so with over 1,009,000 ISBNs given out in 2019, you know that has to have gone up at least 20% for 2020, if not more. I know we had a lot more books coming through here last year than we've ever seen. What that equated out to in 2019 was 675 million books got printed. That's a lot of books. So it's important to be able to have your author brand in mind, in place, and to make sure that your books and your type of writing is targeting the audience that you want it to reach. If you've been on any of my calls, you've heard me say both of these a lot. It's not about how well your book sells. It's all about how well your book sells you. People can buy books everywhere, almost every corner on this planet, as well as online. And your goal with your author brand is to help you stand out. So how do you find your voice? How do you develop your author brand platform? And again, any questions, just jump in. I know we had, let's see. Oh, good. Oh, good. We've had some additional people join us. Awesome. So for those that have joined in late, I will explain again that I cannot see the chat button, so that if you do have questions, just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in and ask a question. I want to make sure we get all your questions answered. So when we talk about finding your voice and building your author platform, we want to identify your audience. We want to recognize their now factor, and we'll talk in a second about what that is. And we want to determine what relief you're going to offer. And in order to go through this exercise, we talk about identify your reader. What are your readers' now factors? Now is night owl worries. What do they wake up in the middle of the night worried about? And why do they turn to you and your book to help them find relief or a solution to that worry? If you're a nonfiction author, you're offering solutions. If you're a novelist, you're offering relief, escape. You're helping them walk away. So if you have a blank piece of paper available next to you and you want to go through this exercise, we can do that. We'll also take some volunteers that if you decide you want to jump in, and we can use you as an example. We'll do one here live in a second when we get a volunteer. So the way we work this with your three-legged stool. So in your far left-hand column on your page, who is it that you help? Who's your audience? Who do you want to read your book? Who are you trying to get your book in the hands of? And then what are their now factors? That goes in your middle column. What do they wake up in the middle of the night thinking about? So let's say, right now, in the last 10 months, there could be a lot of moms out there who all at once are now working from home, moms and dads. I know I hear this from my daughter and my son-in-law, working from home, they're homeschooling. I know I've seen my daughter reach out for books to help her learn to better cope with the stress. So she's looking for nonfiction, spiritual help kind of books. You may also be looking for, that audience might also be looking for books written by educators on how to become. I know there's a lot of blogs out there helping moms and dads on how to become that at-home school teacher. And what do those types of people wake up in the middle of the night thinking about? That middle column is where you want to put their night owl worry factors. And then the far right column, that's where we want to offer relief. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're a novelist, or you could also be we have an author that just completed a hand illustrated coloring book. So for her, she's offering relief. There's the whole connection between the mind and the hand, and the act of coloring helps reduce stress. So part of her marketing strategy is a stress relief. So if someone would like to volunteer, let me go back here. Is there anybody that would like to raise their hand or give me a thumbs up or just jump in? Because I can't see everybody. If you'd like to volunteer here, let me kind of scoot through. Give me a thumbs up or a hands up. See if we've got a volunteer. No volunteers today. Awesome. That means you aced your own. Oh, Karen, hi.
Yeah, I could volunteer because we just did this yesterday.
Yeah, yeah. Karen and I had a phone call yesterday and had this conversation. Awesome. So let me try and go back here. There we go.
And
So
my
who
book
is
is a novel,
but
it's basically about my experience being a caregiver for my mother in her final years. And so I think it helps. And whenever I tell somebody something about the book, they will say, oh, I had to care for my mother, my mother-in-law, or I know someone who had to be a caregiver for someone. And so I think anyone who ever had to be a caregiver would identify with
exactly, yeah,
the book. And I think, the what you wake up in the middle of the night thinking, because I did when I was in that place, was, when will this ever end? How is it going to end? What is the light at the end of the tunnel? How do I do this? How do I get through this? What do I lose, in the process of giving up everything to care for someone? And the relief is that at the end of the story, the main character was happy that she had this experience. I mean, she had learned something from the experience, and she was glad of it, sort of.
Well, and as I recall, you're also offering an element of humor in your writings.
Right.
So that offers some relief also.
And so the whole experience isn't all, I mean, there's difficult things, but she finds a way to laugh at it.
Yeah.
Her mother nagging her, so she pulls away from the gas pump with the pump thing still in the car and rips it off the gas tank. Things that I found humor in.
Right.
And
no, that's a great example. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, terrific. Thank you. That's a perfect example. So you can kind of get the idea of how to go through this exercise for yourself. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out at another time. And just like Karen and I did yesterday, we did a one-on-one conversation about that. So, okay. So what happens is that you get in these Zoom calls and people ask you, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm an author. Okay, great. As we mentioned, it's, a lot of people are writing their books right now because we've had a couple of people say, I'm going to write this before I die. And, we want to make sure we get our words, our legacy down in writing. So if you're in a Zoom call and someone says, what do you do? And this is Bob's in construction and he's written a book. So he answers that question. My book is about construction. Well, that doesn't quite excite me all that much. It's like, okay. But if Bob came back, still trying to get my buttons to work. If Bob adds a little element of more information, my book teaches you how to build schools. Okay, great. I'm getting to know Bob a little bit better now. I know that he's into education, or at least he's into the construction of education. But if Bob were to come back and say, my book teaches communities how to build better schools, which foster the love of learning in our children. Boom, that makes me much more excited. It's taking our story, taking our why, taking the relief that we offer and sharing that in our introductions. So it's not only about helping you build your brand, but it's also about helping you tell that story so that when you are in a spot where you can introduce yourself and say who it is and what it is that you do, make sure you add that element of your why. What is the relief that you offer? That makes your story much more compelling to the people that you're introducing yourself to, and it makes you much more memorable. Hopefully that means then they go out and they start following you on your social media so that as you're talking about your new book coming up, you're going to get more and more people following you and hopefully buyers for your book. That's our goal here. And I'm sorry, my buttons just aren't cooperating today. So this is a moment where I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's anyone who would like to tell their story based upon the whole idea of who you are, what you do. I think I have to stop sharing to do this. Here we go. And I'm going to unmute all. I can ask you to unmute, okay? And if you'd like to take a second to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and weave in that extra little bit of how you help, how you offer relief to your end user. Do we have any exciting takers today? Jennifer, I know you have a great, you were sitting there going, oh, don't let her call on me. Don't let her call
No,
on me.
I don't mind. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, it also gives you a chance to tell us who you are and what you write about.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Lynn. I write the story of Bree McLeod. She's a modern-day shaman of Irish and Scottish lineages. And the books are all written from her voice and from her perspective, so you get to see and experience everything that she does as she moves through this world and the other world and interacts with her allies. Each book, it's written as a series. I actually have 3 books that are out now, and I'm still working on the 4th book. I'm just writing it now. First book is Being Here, then Coming Home, and Chalice and the Blade came out in 2020. And each book takes a mystical, metaphysical, shamanic concept and explores it through story. So Bree McLeod and the other characters are fictional, but the content is not.
So it sounds like part of the relief that you're offering is you're helping, if I'm your reader, you're helping me escape for a moment back in history even.
There is a certain amount of escape, but the books are also written very much, like I said, they have a very non-fictional aspect to them. So they also help people who are seekers, who are looking, who are asking questions, who have a sense that there's maybe something more to life than the physical that we can see. It helps them encounter that through story and maybe even inspire them and awaken within in them things, an awareness that then helps to pull them further along their journey.
That's awesome. Thank you for taking the time to share and play
Yeah,
our
my
little
pleasure.
game today.
My pleasure.
Anybody else want to jump in and offer an introduction of who you are, your audience, and how you help them? No worries. We'll go back to sharing the screen and go on to our next slide here. Terrific. Let me reduce this down. So we talked about that. One of the things that we have learned over the years, and we've identified different types of books that tend to sell well. And this is, originally this list was created for nonfiction books. But what I have noticed is that when you define nonfiction in a broad scope, it applies to a lot of different genres of books, whether it's memoirs or self-help or how-tos. And so for our conversation today, we are looking at the bigger picture of nonfiction. But I think we can also apply this to novels and there's a new genre that someone has been talking about lately, where it's kind of novels based on real life stories. And I know a couple of you are working on some of those. So the 4 areas that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to reduce that. We want to offer relief, hope, answers, and solutions. And we'll show you some examples here to help bring this into more perspective. So we have the soapbox, the struggle, the system, and societal books. So let me explain what I mean by that. So a soapbox book. This is where we support a cause, we create a movement, offer a new perspective. This is an example of a book that we did for a gentleman. He is a model agent out of New York City and Miami. And a lot of the young women that he represents were coming here from third world countries and showing up in New York, not realizing they didn't know how to get an apartment. They didn't know if they were sick. They didn't know where to go to get help or find a doctor. So he created a nonprofit, and he gets other major retailers to donate into this nonprofit. And they're teaching these young women and male models how do you buy a car? How do you grab a taxi? How do you find an apartment? Just the basic skills that are needed to help them become successful in their career. So that's an example of a soapbox. Another soapbox is, we had an author, she's in the Florida area. She has 4 daughters. And at the time she wrote this book, they were in either junior high, high school. And that's when girls can be brutally honest with each other. And the key there was brutal bullies. It happens, unfortunately. And so she took it upon herself to create a program called Girl Power for Good. And I don't know if you can tell by her caricature here, which also happens to be a St. Louis illustrator. We were talking about illustrators earlier. She and her daughters are both very tall. And one of the things they did in common together was volleyball. So she has created a program and even opened up an entire volleyball community. And she will either bring it to your school, back when we could do these things, or they would come on field trips to her volleyball academy and learn how to play well in the sandbox together. That became her soapbox. This is an example of both a soapbox and a struggle. Now, a struggle can be defined as how we turn a life mess into a new resolution or a message for others. This author also happens to be out of the New York area, but her mission was to promote a woman's right to know more about her health. And as a part of her life mission, she was a nurse practitioner. She also created a nonprofit, and once a year for 30 days, she takes a group of doctors and nurses to Haiti, and they teach the women in the community down there how to have better health practices that those women then pass on to the rest of the community. So they've created this big ripple effect with her book. This is an example of a struggle book. This was written by a woman who was the eldest of 6 children, and they happened to unfortunately see her parents get killed when she was about 15, and she was able to get all 6 of her siblings out of Cambodia. And the book is about her trip from Cambodia ending up in Chicago. Definitely a way to turn a mess into a new message for others and inspire others on their journey. Then there's something as simple as a system. where you pick a number. It helps you organize your outline on your book, especially for the nonfiction books. And you offer a step-by-step approach. And both of these, the one on the left is a sales call, how to make sales, increase your sales. The one on the right is just increase productivity. Some of you may know both of these authors. They're St. Louis authors. And then this was an example of where we took someone's blogs. It's also a system, but he took his blogs. We created a sequence within the book itself. He specializes in selling and teaching sales and training to agricultural sales businesses. So like Monsanto, people who are involved in the whole ecosystem of agricultural business. And he broke his blogs into 4 sections. Much like sales, you have a spring, a summer, a fall, and a winter. And so within each of those seasons of sales, he was able to pull his blogs in and help teach a system that he likes to promote. This is an example of a soapbox and a system. This author is currently out of the Albuquerque area. She originally was from St. Louis, a former CEO or executive director of a nonprofit, and she specializes in children and developing children into the wonderful diamonds that they should be. She has spent the last year and a half pre-COVID. She was traveling around the country speaking, sold her home, bought an RV, put a lot of stuff in storage. So it's a fun story about someone who took the power of publishing and really took it to the nth degree and turned it into a speaking career for herself. And she has both a soapbox that she stands on because she has a cause that she believes in helping these children grow and to be the fulfilled adults that we all want to become. And then she has a system that helps her do that. And then there's something that falls in the category of a societal book. This is where you're sharing information or fun stuff about your community. This is a book we finished last fall for Charlie Brennan, who, if you're in St. Louis, you may have heard him either on KMOX or he also has a TV show on PBS. So you need to ask yourself, it's great to have an author brand. It's great to figure out what type of book I'll be printing, but why do I even need a book? These are some of the quotes that we've had some of our authors over the years tell us. It creates an additional stream of income, but I do always tell our authors, and if you've spoken with me one-on-one, you know, I always say, please don't plan your retirement around the sale of your book. Your book is a marketing tool, even if you're a novelist. And I know Karen and I, we spoke about this yesterday in our phone call, is that, you know, as a novelist, if you think about and take a look at the novelists that are the most successful, you know what their book's about. They've done a fantastic job. You know that J.K. Rowling is going to write a series, what her stories are going to be like. You know that, was it Joan Collins? Some of my novel people, the example I gave yesterday was Jodi Picoult. That's one of the novelists that I know. I know that her books are always going to be mysterious and have a twist at the end that always surprises you. So it doesn't matter whether you're nonfiction or fiction. Your books can add a trust factor, especially if you're a speaker. It opens doors. It gives you increased gigs, especially for the nonfiction speakers and trainers and consultants. It keeps your name on someone's bookshelf. It's a great way to develop ongoing relationships, no matter what your book genre is. So the third thing I promised to talk about today was, how do you make an impact? How do you get published? What publishing options do you have? Excuse me. I break it down into 4 main categories. So we have your traditional publishers and trade. Trade is just a generic term, meaning traditional publishers typically are huge conglomerates that have a bunch of additional publishing companies under them that specialize in specific, like nonfiction. Wiley and Sons is a brand under a bigger umbrella, but they specialize in nonfiction. We have what I call the author be aware, borderline beware, but it's author be aware. We have the author arranged, meaning the author is in charge of all of your vendors. A couple of people talked about that earlier today before we started recording. And then you have your author assisted, and we're going to briefly go over what each of those are. This is a chart that I use to show from left to right. On your left-hand side, we're going to start, that's where the traditional and trade publishers are. It's a slower process, whereas on the far right, your DIY, your author arranged, and your author assisted is a much faster process. In the middle, between the two, is what I call the author beware. And we're going to break this down, hopefully, into some easy to understand conversation, because that middle part can be confusing. It's still confusing to me. So this is an example, and I completely understand. This is not here for you to read what each of these little tiny fine prints, but I love the graphic to show the spider kind of effect, spider web effect. So there's a group of what's called the top 5 traditional publishers. Those include the Penguin Random House, Simon Schuster, Hachette, HarperCollins, and Macmillan. And there's buzz out there that soon, what is now 5 may soon be 4. I'm not sure who's merging with who. The other publishing house that you'll hear me talk about a lot is Ingram. Ingram is one of the primary distribution sources for all of these top 5. So when you're dealing with a traditional and trade, more than likely, yes, you're going to need an agent. You can't even get into the door of one of these top 5 without an agent. Whoever owns your ISBN will be the one receiving your royalties, and then they will be paying you out. So your publisher will own your ISBN and you will be published under them. Around 2008, 2010, a lot of these major publishers that you see listed here, they downsized, and one of the first departments to be let go was their marketing department. A lot of those people went out and started their own publishing houses. So all these little spider webs that you see under these major publishing houses are acquisitions made by, whether they were people that used to work for that publisher or just other smaller independent publishers that have now fallen under the umbrella, the huge umbrella of these top 5. When and if you get into these top 5, you do have a greater propensity for retail opportunities. You will have lower royalties versus some of the other options that you have. And your traditional publisher will more than likely have more say over what your book looks like, what the editing is, who the illustrator is, those types of things. That's what you can find with traditional publishers. One of the trends that we have noticed and been involved with over the last couple of years, is traditionally published authors have started moving into author-assisted publishing. Some of you may know Martha Beck. The book on the far left was her last traditionally published book. She probably has 15 or so total books. The book in the middle was a collection of essays that was originally traditionally published, but it had reached its point where she could take back the rights of ownership, which she did. And then we were involved in a minor way in helping to publish that. And then the book on the right was published in, I believe it was spring of 2016. And we were involved with some of the marketing and social media graphics to help promote that book, which was completely 100% author assisted, meaning she worked with a book shepherd that we were affiliated with, and we were on that team to help produce that book. So, and we've seen that with a couple other what the traditional authors are traditionally published authors are finding is that once they see how much more money they can make in sales per book, they're creating their own independent publishing company and publishing their own book. Now, she has a huge following to begin with, so she came with a ready-made audience. Then we have what I call the author be aware. This is where you'll find phrases for people in the industry called indie and vanity and hybrid. And I do want to remind everybody again, real quick, that if you do have a question, please hop on, just unmute yourself and verbally raise your hand and let us know that you've got a question. That would be great. And then I can help you answer it. So this middle section with indie, vanity, and hybrid, let me see if I can help us all understand this. This is very much buyer, author beware. This is that smoky area that I talked about before, that sometimes you need to just have open eyes, ask a lot of questions. If you're not sure, we offer a service to authors that if one of the greatest phrases that all authors love to hear is that we'd love to publish your book. Unfortunately, a lot of people are saying that they're not really authors. So I offer a free service that if someone says, I'd love to publish your book, and you're not sure whether it's a viable opportunity for you, I'm more than happy to read that contract and give you questions that you can go back and ask to make sure that you're covering and protecting yourself. I'm not a lawyer. If as I'm reading it, I do see something that you need to discuss with an attorney, I do have publishing attorneys that I can refer you to. If you're doing this on your own, you want to be aware of misrepresentation. And what I mean by that is, I'll give some examples here visually in a second, but you want to make sure that, do these people, how long have they been in business? How long are they just printing companies? I love printing companies. I grew up in printing companies, but there are some printing companies out there who are now marketing themselves as publishers. They will also request that you have a minimum of 1,000 books that you need to buy. You don't need to be buying 1,000 books unless you've already sold that. So these are types of things just to be aware of. There's a lot of overcharges in this genre of the author be aware, the indie vanity hybrid. The indie publishers are, and everybody has their own definition of this. What I see is an indie publisher is someone who is independent of the top 5 and of all their spider counterparts that are part of that top 5. And they've put out a shingle, they're calling themselves a publisher, and they may or may not have been in the business very long, and they may or may not really know what it is that they're doing. They're independent of traditional publishing, but they're not quite DIY. Some of them, as I mentioned, are printers, which sometimes fall into that vanity press, where a lot of people who are doing perhaps family cookbooks or family memoirs, that's considered a vanity kind of book. And then you have your hybrid publishers. A hybrid publisher is defined as someone who will help you get your book ready for publishing. They may post your book with distribution on Amazon, which you can do yourself also, but they're going to be taking a portion of your royalties, and then they will pay you after they take their portion. Their fees may be lower because what they're doing is they're taking a smaller fee up front to help you produce your book, and then you're paying them off the remainder of their fee in royalties until you get that paid off. You have to be careful with that model only because sometimes their contract in fine print will say that they own your book until that fee has been paid off or for a certain amount of time. The one that you really have to watch is Balboa. There's another one called Ex Libris. There's a whole group. If you want to know more about the publishers to avoid, the 2 websites that I recommend, the one on the left, preded.com, was originally started by Mark Levine. If you don't have a copy of this book and you're planning to do a lot more than one book, you may want to get it. It's called The Fine Print of Self-Publishing. And he actually lists out in there the publishers to avoid. The website does the same thing. Selfpublishingadvice.org is run by a nonprofit group called, the acronym is ALLI, the Alliance of Literary something something. But again, their market, they watch the market and they make sure that they list out those to avoid. So as you can see, it can be very confusing in that indie hybrid arena. One of the situations that we got pulled into, and just be careful not to get goosed by the moose. Yes, you can go to China and you can buy books much independently, much cheaper than you can get them printed here in the US. But I'm going to ask you, and I will always ask, what are you going to do with 3,000 books? You have to know how you're going to market it. You have to know that you have them already sold before you buy that many. In today's print on demand world, you don't need to buy that many. You can buy one, you can buy 10, you can buy 100, you can, we have people that are going to that go to conferences and they call us and say, Cathy, I need, 200 books in Dallas by this date, or I need 500 books in LA by this date. Those things we can make happen, and we can find you the cheapest price to make that happen and get them shipped there for you. You don't have to buy 3,000. What happened was an author came to us, was recommended after she had already printed 3,000 books about a moose, and she had actually also purchased 3,000 stuffed moose. She did not have a website. She was not even on Amazon, but she had a basement full of books and stuffed moose. So we helped her the best we could. We did get the book up on Amazon, and we did get the book to where on her website, and help her create a couple funnels for sales. But the time to talk to us is before you print the 3,000, not after. The other buyer beware, or author beware circumstance that we've encountered this year is, especially in the last 10 months, there's been a lot of independent indie publishing houses, not part of the top 5, but indie publishing houses that have just closed their doors. So we've had authors who have been referred to us that we've been able to backtrack and help them figure out how to get access to original files. The top 3 are written by a woman. She specializes in books about Notre Dame. She went to Notre Dame. She's well known there. She works a lot with their sports teams and writing books and helping them promote that part of their curriculum. The gentleman that wrote the other 2 in front, The Crossing and Choices, he's an author from Illinois. It just got caught where, both of these people had people wanting to buy their books. The publisher had shut down. You could no longer get the books on Amazon, and they had no way of fulfilling the orders. And we were able to help them navigate this whole industry and gain access to the original art so that we could get them set up as their own independent publishers and help them sell their book, that people were wanting to buy their books. So that's part of that author be aware. Again, I want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please jump in at any time. So then we're going to talk briefly about the author arranged DIY and what I call public postings and what that means. So as you can see, we're moving from left to right across the screen, and we're starting to approach a higher speed limit. We've gotten out of most of the smoke. Most of the confusion is behind us. And DIY, it's a great place for authors to start, but my caution for DIY authors is just like putting a book together is a lot like baking a cake. If your daughter came to you and said, I'm getting married, I want a wedding cake, I want it to look fun like this. She hands you a picture and you go, oh yeah, I can do that. But then unfortunately you end up with a photo on the right. If you're not a qualified chef, you wouldn't be baking a cake. If you're not a qualified book designer, book editor, book marketer, then maybe that's not the best place for you. Some of the pros and cons of being a do-it-yourselfer is one, it's a great place to step into it at a low cost. Amazon, when you step into their model, you can use one of their ISBNs. They show up as the publisher on your book. They are your distribution. You get to keep 100% ownership of your book. You have reduced royalties, which is normal. That's predictable because you're splitting the cost of the book. So the example that I give for people is, let's say we're going to list your book, and I like easy math. So we list your book on Amazon for $10. Amazon is going to automatically keep 45% or $4.50. They're also going to charge you to print your book. And let's say that's $2. So automatically now they're keeping $6.50. So you'll get the remaining out of that $10 book. When it sells on Amazon, you'll get $3.50 in your royalties. Sometimes you have to be careful with the quality, both on Amazon and Ingram. Ingram has improved their quality over the last few years to where I have a lot of authors that prefer Ingram's quality over Amazon. And then experience. Experience is something is, I know some of you have been hiring editors and hiring illustrators, and you want to make sure to ask for samples. You want to make sure you have contracts in place, especially with illustrators, to know who owns that artwork. Can you use it later on and make t-shirts without having to pay another fee to that illustrator? So there's a lot involved with DIY. Do your research. And there's a lot of information out there on the internet. And just make sure that the book that you imagine in your hand is the one that you're going to end up with. One of the other author arranged category, or one of the topics that falls into author arranged, is public postings. And that's probably one of the first places you can start. Is if you don't already have a blog, make sure you have a website or a blog, or make sure that you're posting on Facebook and LinkedIn. I have a lot of authors that started on LinkedIn and started writing articles on LinkedIn, and as their business grew, they could take those articles and repurpose them into books, and that's how they kind of tiptoed into becoming a published author. Some of you here in St. Louis may know Bill Ellis. He recently, a lot of his work started with his blog, and then he also just recently started a podcast. And he's known for helping build brands all around the planet, actually. So that was the author arranged section. Then you have author assisted, and this is where you go pretty fast because you're working with people that have been doing this for decades. They either came out of the publishing industry, or as in my case, I was able to mentor under the CEO of Merit Publishing out in LA, who taught me the industry when she was coaching one of our author clients. So author assisted is the type of services that we fall under, and a lot of people, this is where you'll find book coaches, book shepherds. One of the other terms is concierge publishing. Essentially, I liken it to a 10,000 piece puzzle, and you're working with people who know how to put the puzzle together and can help you make sure that you're making the best decisions for you. You have access to the best practices of both traditional and self-published. It is fee-based, but it allows you to keep 100% of your profits and royalties. You're essentially set up as your own independent publishing company, and you get to maintain 100% of your copyright. We run you through Ingram, which is how you access global distribution. And you get the chance to rely upon the experience of experts. Now, one of the things I do want to remind people is, and I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about DIY, if your book is only listed on Amazon and not, especially not through, if you're not on Ingram, a lot of the Barnes and Nobles, even here in St. Louis, will hesitate or just tell you they cannot buy your book because it's distributed only through Amazon. So that's something else you want to be really careful about if you want to have bookstore access. I spoke with an author last week who really didn't care whether she had bookstore access, and she was just thrilled to be on Amazon. So it's whatever suits you. That's the underlying message. One of the other options that you have, we offer 3 or 4 times a year, we offer a collaborative collection of essays. If you're an unpublished or even a published author, and you're looking for an easy way to hop onto the publishing train, we always offer an Amazon bestseller campaign with each of our anthologies, which is basically a collection of essays. We pick a topic, and then you submit one chapter. We tell you the word count. We tell you how many words we need in your bio. And it gives you a way, one, you get to meet all the other authors, like this Fearless and Fabulous, and the one that we launched last October. Both of those were international bestsellers. We had authors involved in both books that were from all around the planet. We've had Australia, we've had Paris, we've had Canada, we've had Mexico. I know there's a couple more out there, but it helps you get to know those authors. We had authors in all 4 time zones in the US. That helps you grow and expand your business. They get to know you, then they become your cheerleaders and your champions, and they recommend you and your services out to other people and all the people that they know. So that's a very quick way to get your message out there, is to sponsor one chapter in one of these, in an anthology. And we're not the only ones that offer those. It's just a cost-effective way to get your word out there. So gosh, I can't believe I'm done in less than an hour. But again, please raise your hand if you have any questions. I did want to remind everybody a couple things. We have 2 freebies that everyone on this call will get. The one on your left is Know Your Publishing Options. It's really just a 11 by 17 that's going to open up into a huge chart, and it's going to, all those options that we just went through on the slides, it has them itemized out as to what the differences are. And the buyer beware, it has a buyer be aware section in each column to help remind you of what the difference is between all of them. On the far right, you'll also receive our top 100 book marketing ideas and tips. And on the second Thursday, just like today, we have the All About Inspiring Author Conversations. I know a couple of you here had talked about traditional publishing and how do I find an author agent. And Julie Hoey has been very helpful in helping us pull together all of our speakers for the rest of the year. And I know we have 2 specifically lined up. One is in April and the other one might be in May. Julie, are you on?
I am. You're talking about Randy?
Yeah.
Yeah, Randy's in May.
So we have Amy Collins in May and Randy Pizer, both women, but they both work in traditional publishing. And we'll be talking about how to work with an agent, how to find an agent, what kind of information you should be ready to have ready to talk with the agent, depending upon your genre. So if you're, even if you are already self-published, a lot of these agents are looking for authors who have a following. That's the one thing that I've learned in starting to talk with people who represent authors and who work in the traditional publishing arena, is one of the tools that they use is they go out there and they follow social media and they look for authors. And as they see your following growing, as you get into the thousands of people following you, it piques an interest for them and they start reaching out to authors who have that existing following. And it does happen where then, maybe you've reached a point in your life and you don't want to have to worry about all the details and you'd rather have a traditional publisher take that part of your business under their wing and go for it and just see what happens. And we've seen some authors do that. We've had a couple authors who have been approached by traditional publishers who have decided not to go that route. The one in particular was the woman in New York that had the nonprofit where she helped women in Haiti. She decided it was more important for her to teach her message of good health and that she could put more money back into the nonprofit by keeping it self-published than to go with an author. So for her, she chose to stay self-published. So I'm going to get quiet here for a minute. Does anybody have any questions, anything they need clarified over what we've gone over? I threw a lot of information at you very quickly. I'm going to stop my share. And if you have, I would say just unmute yourself and jump in if you have any questions. And I don't see anybody jumping in, which is perfectly fine. I want to thank everybody for being here today. You will receive a follow-up email that gives you a link to this recording. It will be posted on YouTube. You can always go back and review it in case you can't quite remember something. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll have information in the email with our contact information, and we'll have links to those freebies. Jennifer had to scoot, bye-bye. And we'll have links to those freebies so that you can download those also. So thank you all for being here with me today. Thank you for letting me ramble about something I love to talk about. And we'll circle back and we'll talk with you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cathy. Very
Thanks,
informative.
guys. Thank you so much for being here.
This is
Hi.
very helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Yes.
you. Bye-bye.